Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're taking some complex historical source material and turning it into a clear visual story. We're actually heading back in time to a tournament that completely, and I mean permanently, changed the global game of association football. We're going to look at the superstars, the intense drama, and the modern technology that literally built the sport as we know it today. So let's just dive right in. I want you to imagine a sporting event defined almost entirely by unprecedented firsts, unbreakable records, and some really dramatic shifts in global power. Think about everything you associate with a massive modern sports tournament today. What does the true dawn of that modern football spectacle actually look like? Well, the answer to that question lies squarely in the year 1958. That was the year the FIFA World Cup headed to Sweden. To really grasp the impact of this event, we kind of have to put ourselves in the mindset of the late 1950s, right? The post-war world was modernizing rapidly, commercial air travel was expanding, and the world was starting to feel just a little bit smaller and a lot more connected. Sweden, being a prosperous and neutral nation, provided this pristine, highly organized backdrop for a global gathering. And what's wild is that, to this day, Sweden remains the first and only Nordic country to ever host this massive tournament. The choices made here? They'd end up rippling through sports history forever. Moving into Section 1, a tournament of firsts setting the global stage, let's see exactly how this specific tournament built the structural foundation for the massive, highly produced spectacle we all tune into today. The technological leap here was just staggering. This was the first broadly televised World Cup, relayed all across the continent by the European Broadcasting Union. It is really hard to overstate how revolutionary this was. The whole concept of millions of people sitting in different countries, speaking entirely different languages, yet holding their breath and gasping at the exact same moment, it basically birthed the idea of a shared global living room. It was such a monumental cultural event that this was the first time a lot of fans actually went out and bought television sets strictly so they could watch these matches live. The organizers even staggered the kickoff times for Sweden's matches. That way, locals could go to the games in person without missing their own national team broadcasting on their brand new screens. Which brings us to Section 2, the road to Sweden, debuts, and missing giants. Because obviously a massive, brand new global broadcast needs a compelling cast of characters to keep viewers tuned in. And man, did they get one, thanks to a wildly unpredictable qualification phase. Just look at how fresh and unfamiliar this field of competitors was. We saw the historic first ever World Cup appearances of the Soviet Union, Northern Ireland, and Wales. But perhaps even more amazing is the United Kingdom's sweep. This tournament remains the first and literally the only time in over 60 years of history that all four UK home nations, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, qualified for the exact same World Cup. It was a golden moment that really signaled a rising British footballing presence on the global stage. But on the flip side, while exciting new faces were arriving, some traditional titans of the sport were shockingly absent. Italy failed to qualify for the very first time in their storied history, and joining them on the sidelines were the two-time champions Uruguay, who had just been dominant semifinalists 4 years prior. These weren't just good teams, they were the foundational pillars of early international football, so their utter failure to make the cut sent shockwaves through the sporting world. It signaled loud and clear that the old guard was being overthrown, and the crown was totally up for grabs. All right, Section 3, new rules and tragic contexts. So this new-look roster of teams was stepping into a vastly different landscape, featuring brand new structural rules while simultaneously being overshadowed by some really intense, real-world tragedies. Let's look at the tournament mechanics first. FIFA introduced a brand new metric called goal average. It's simply the ratio of goals a team scored divided by the goals they conceded, and it was brought in to separate tied teams in the group stage. Now, what's kind of funny here is the irony of its first run. Playoff matches were still held for 3 groups that ended in points ties, but because all 3 of those playoff games ended in decisive, clear-cut victories, this newly introduced metric wasn't even strictly necessary to separate the teams. Still, it marked a huge, permanent shift in how tournament progressions were calculated moving forward. But, we can't just look at the rulebook. We have to recognize how non-sporting events drastically altered the tournament landscape. Honestly, far more than any mathematical metric ever could. In Group 4, England's squad was devastated by the February 1958 Munich air disaster. This heartbreaking plane crash claims the lives of several key players who formed the core of the national team, including 21-year-old Duncan Edwards, who was widely considered a once-in-a-generation talent. So England arrived in Sweden emotionally and tactically shattered.
Meanwhile, in Group 3, you have Hungary. Just 4 years prior, they were the most feared team on the planet. But following the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, the team was essentially dismantled. Generational superstars like Sandor Kocsis and Ferenc Puskás fled the country and refused to return. The geopolitical reality of the 1950s absolutely dictated the sporting reality on the pitch.
This brings us to Section 4, the record breakers, Fontaine and Pelé. With the stage set, the broadcast live, and traditional powers either reeling from tragedy or entirely absent, a massive vacuum opened up. It was time for new superstars to step into the spotlight.
And wow, did this tournament deliver on star power? It birthed this brilliant dual narrative. On one hand, you have French striker Just Fontaine scoring an absolutely staggering 13 goals in a single competition. To put that into perspective, a modern Golden Boot winner typically scores around 6 goals. Fontaine more than doubled that in just 6 games. It's a World Cup record that impossibly still stands today. At the exact same time, Brazil unleashed a 17-year-old phenomenon named Pelé, cementing a legacy that would go on to define the beautiful game for decades.
What's truly incredible about Pelé's story is that he didn't even start the tournament on the pitch. He actually rode the bench until the final group game against the Soviet Union. The Brazilian coach finally unleashed him, and Pelé immediately provided an assist. From there, he absolutely exploded into the knockout stages. He scored the only goal against Wales in the quarterfinals, and followed that up by netting a spectacular hat trick against France in the semifinals.
All of this leads us to Section 5, the highest scoring final. This high-scoring momentum from both France and Brazil was bound to collide, leading to an unforgettable climax in Solna for the final match.
It all came down to Brazil versus the host nation, Sweden. This was a historic clash of continents. It was the very first time teams from Europe and South America ever met in a World Cup final. The pressure on Sweden was immense, and unfortunately for them, it was the first time in history a host nation reached the final match but failed to lift the trophy in front of their home crowd. And they failed to win because Brazil was simply unstoppable. They took the crown with a 5-2 victory in front of nearly 50,000 spectators. That number, 5, that's incredibly important because it firmly represents the most goals ever scored by a winning team in a World Cup final. Combining both teams' efforts, that makes 7. 7 remains the absolute highest number of total goals ever scored in a final. Picture the Swedish fans in the stadium, or the millions watching on their blurry black and white TVs. They probably expected a tense, defensive battle. Instead, they got an absolute offensive masterclass, a 7-goal thriller that completely redefined what a modern championship match could look like. And stealing the show in that explosive final was, of course, the young prodigy. At just 17 years old, Pelé notched 2 gorgeous goals. With that performance, he instantly became the youngest player to participate in, score in, and win a World Cup final. It was the absolute coronation of a king. This historic outcome has signaled a massive geopolitical power shift in the sport. Brazil didn't just win their first title, they became the first non-European team to win a World Cup hosted on European soil. It entirely shattered the European stronghold on their home turf and established South America as a permanent dominant force in global football. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. We've seen the birth of live television broadcasts uniting a continent, the shattering of goal-scoring records by Fontaine, the teenage debut of the greatest player in history, and the geographic power shifts of the sport on European soil. Knowing all these unprecedented firsts, is it any wonder 1958 is considered the true catalyst for the modern football spectacle? Think about that the next time you turn on your TV to watch a massive international match. Until next time, keep learning.